our 80-year-old senile shit show of a president, Joe Biden, has officially announced he's seeking a second term and will be running for re-election in 2024. So God help us all.
Holy shit, $10 trillion is just in the last 2 years. Like, how freaking insane is that? I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovich, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Freedom Friday. And I'm going to start out this episode with a fun little audio clip.
President Biden got a rousing reception today from union leaders in D.C., but not everyone is as enthusiastic about his just announced bid for re-election.
Should he run for re-election? And look at this, 70% say he should not run.
48% say that his age is a major issue.
I'm running for re-election.
The president kicked off his 2024 re-election campaign with a flashy 3-minute video that dropped at 6 a.m. Eastern.
President Biden just announced officially that he is running for re-election.
Let's finish this job. I know we can.
Republicans hit back with a video of their own, predicting chaos in the streets if Biden wins re-election.
Officials closed the city of San Francisco this morning, citing the escalating crime.
Trump is Biden's likeliest opponent. He's polling ahead of his Republican challengers, including still undeclared Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Are you leaning one way or another? Stay tuned.
According to the latest polls, a repeat of the 2020 election is not popular. When asked what feeling comes to mind when considering a Biden-Trump matchup, 38% chose exhaustion, 29% fear, just 16%, apparently including these guys, were excited at the prospect.
Okay, so if you had not already heard, which if you hadn't, you must be like living in complete silence. But now you know, our 80-year-old senile shit show of a president, Joe Biden, has officially announced he's seeking a second term and will be running for re-election in 2024. So God help us all. Anyone who thinks that this geriatric clown is fit for office, like, really needs to have their mental health evaluated. And this is my personal opinion, but honestly, who in their right mind would vote for this man again? His approval rating is dismal. You just heard from that clip. MSNBC reported that 70% of people say he shouldn't run. CNN reported that 48% of people polled say his age is a major issue. And there was a Harvard Youth poll that just came out a couple days ago on April 24th, and it was released by the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. And Biden's approval rating among voters aged 18 to 29, which is like a very core demographic, is down to 36% from 41% last spring. And the same survey showed that 67% of voters think Biden is too old to be president, and 56% have doubts about his mental fitness for the job. And you can count me into that 56%, even though I wasn't polled. So, I mean, let's take a look at what has happened during the course of this man's presidency. This administration has successfully managed to wreak more havoc and destruction in this country in 2 years than I ever thought I would witness in the course of my lifetime. President Biden has essentially tanked our nation's economy, caused record inflation, while approving trillions in spending since taking office. Meanwhile, making flippant jokes and laughing about how it's his job to spend money while telling us the economy's doing great and we have no inflation. There was a statement from the White House yesterday during which Biden said that the American economy remains strong and that it's all because of his, quote, investing in America agenda is rebuilding the economy from the middle out and the bottom up following decades of failed trickle-down economic policies. But yet at the same time, it also came out yesterday that there are more predictions we're going to fall into a deeper economic recession this year due to, quote, acute bank stress with what happened in the banking industry during the last month or so. And according to Paul Ashworth, who's the chief of the North America economist at Capital Economics, He stated that the growth rate of the leading economic index in the United States is deep in negative territory, which has proven to be an excellent signal of recession with very few false positives over the past 50 years. And there was also a recent CNBC survey which indicated that 62% of Americans disapprove of the way that Biden is handling the economy. And that's up from 57% in a previous poll, despite all the propaganda being skewed by the White House about what a great economy we have. So, on top of that, our country is like mounting debt, which I believe is somewhere in the range of $31.4 trillion. This is leading us down the path of defaulting on our loans to the point where the US Treasury will not be able to issue any more bills, bonds, or notes. Just this past Tuesday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that failure to lift the federal borrowing cap will trigger an economic catastrophe that would decimate jobs and make borrowing money more expensive for years to come. She warned that in the event of a default, American businesses would face deteriorating credit markets while the government would probably be unable to issue payments to military families and seniors who rely on Social Security. But hey, fuck the men and women who sacrificed to protect this country, and fuck the seniors who worked hard their whole lives putting money into Social Security. Let's just keep spending money on social justice issues and creating DEI initiatives and positions, which, by the way, President Biden has completely weakened our military with his focus on this DEI shit instead of actually preparing to protect the United States against foreign attack, which seems to be getting more and more likely than it ever has been in my lifetime with the escalating tensions with both Russia and China. We have the lowest attrition and recruitment rates in the highest attrition and lowest recruitment rates in the history of our military because nobody wants to join or remain under this administration. Biden has destroyed our energy independence while pushing his climate crisis agenda. He's implemented severely costly and poorly planned climate initiatives that we can't possibly accommodate with our current electrical grid system. He's weaponized our FBI and the IRS, promoted gender-affirming surgery for minors, advocated for transgender men competing in women's sports, and tried to take away the rights of parents to protect their kids. He's compromised our nation's security by leaving our borders open to millions and millions of illegal migrants, many of whom, by the way, are terrorists and criminals, and caused a fentanyl crisis that has killed thousands and thousands of Americans. He's repeatedly inappropriately handled classified documents, consistently lied to and deceived the American people. He's been a foreign agent for China and the Ukraine, and he's made the United States, which was once regarded as the strongest nation in the world, now basically a laughingstock to pretty much every other country in the world. Joe Biden is a complete fucking embarrassment to our nation. He is basically a pedophile who can't stop sniffing children's hair. He's unable to string together complete sentences without fumbling his words, and he can't walk up a fucking flight of stairs or ride a bicycle on a flat surface without falling. I mean, my God, this man can't even properly read a teleprompter or cross a stage without looking like he has no fucking clue where he's supposed to be going. It is absolutely disgraceful. And quite honestly, I think that President Trump said it best when responding to Biden's announcement that he would be seeking a second term. So I'm going to play a very short clip of that. As soon as I find the right clip. That's not it. Hang on. Hang on. That's old. Here it is. Sorry.
You could take the 5 worst presidents in American history and put them together, and they would not have done the damage Joe Biden has done to our nation in just a few short years. Not even close.
Exactly, right? So, hey, let's go, Brandon, 2024. And I know I just ranted for like 5 fucking minutes. And I don't think I covered even a fraction of what this man or this administration has done to purposefully destroy this country since taking office. And I think it would honestly take hours to cover all of the nonsense. But we're just going to take a look at a few things that have happened over the past week or two. So, Stephanie, what do you have for us?
Well, first of all, that was an epic takedown of Biden. I love it. And, you know, there are a ton of topics that we can cover, but let's just pick the weaponization of federal government agencies to start with. So an IRS whistleblower is prepared to come forward and talk to Congress about information that contradicts Attorney General Merrick Garland's sworn testimony to Congress regarding the investigation into Hunter Biden. The whistleblower is alleging mishandling and political interference in the criminal probe of the first son, which I think we all knew, but now it looks like there's going to be proof and evidence coming forth. So the IRS whistleblower hasn't made his identity public yet, as he's a senior IRS official who's been overseeing the investigation. His attorney, Mark Lytle, said in a letter to a handful of House and Senate committees, quote, "Despite serious risks of retaliation, my client is offering to provide you with the information necessary to exercise your constitutional oversight function and wishes to make the disclosures in a nonpartisan manner to the leadership of the relevant committees on both sides of the political aisle," end quote. He's made disclosures to the Inspector General of the Treasury and Justice Departments, and he's prepared to talk to Congress and show his documentation that says that he has proof of this whole cover-up and that there are complicit high-level officials. So House Oversight Chair James Comer told ABC News, quote, "The House Committee on Oversight and Accountability has been following the Bidens' tangled web of complex corporate and financial records. We've been wondering all along where the heck the DOJ and IRS have been. Now it appears the Biden administration may have been working overtime to prevent the Bidens from facing any consequences," end quote. And even CNN is reporting this, saying, quote, "Federal prosecutors have been investigating President Joe Biden's son since at least 2018 and have weighed bringing charges against him for tax crimes and a false statement. So far, no charges have been filed. GOP lawmakers in the House, meantime, have launched probes into the Biden family finances, as well as the so-called weaponization of federal government agencies," end quote. Tara, they've been investigating Hunter Biden since 2018. Like, they've had his laptop with all of this proof since 2019. Do you think maybe they're stalling until the statute of limitations is up? And like, do you think there will actually be any accountability from this whole whistleblower coming forward?
Honestly, Stephanie, I would be surprised, because has there been accountability for any whistleblower that has stepped forward to provide evidence of the Biden family's corruption? No, there have been several FBI whistleblowers. There have been tons of investigation being done by Republicans in Congress. And can you name one instance where there has actually been any repercussions or anyone involved has been held accountable? Because honestly, I can't.
No. And that's what's driving me crazy is there is so much evidence. And I just can't help but think if this were, Don Jr. or Ivana, like they would be all over this. People would be in prison.
Yeah.
So there's just such a double standard. But speaking of the IRS, remember the 87,000 new IRS agents that were supposed to be hired as a result of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act?
Oh, yes.
Well, House Republicans voted to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for steep spending cuts, including cutting the funding for those 87,000 new IRS agents in an effort to up the pressure on President Joe Biden to negotiate over raising the nation's borrowing limit. So the bill passed the House, and while they say it's dead on arrival to the Senate, House Republican leadership released a statement saying, quote, "Today's vote also sends a clear message to President Biden. Continuing to ignore the problem is not an option. The president must come to the table to negotiate," end quote. So Biden's been refusing to negotiate, and it's raised eyebrows even to many people on the left. So this bill, they're saying, serves as like a symbolic GOP victory meant to put more pressure on Biden to actually negotiate before the U.S. hits the debt ceiling sometime this summer or early fall. So I want to play a clip from C-SPAN on the whole talks over the debt ceiling that really puts into perspective how out of control this administration's spending is.
That was an increase in spending that you highlighted earlier. Put that into perspective of what folks back home, when you hear trillions and billions, if you spent $13 million every day since Jesus Christ was born, you still would not have spent $10 trillion. And that is just the increase in spending that the one party Democrat rule did over the last 2 years with Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer leading the ship. And people wonder why inflation has gone up 14.9% in those 2 years when inflation was 1.4% before all that spending started.
So we talked about that before, how inflation is caused by government spending, but holy shit, $10 trillion is just in the last 2 years. Like, how freaking insane is that? So you have Hunter Biden getting a pass by the IRS, even though there's all this evidence of criminal activity that keeps piling up. But they're happy to hire 87,000 IRS agents to go after the rest of us. And let me remind everyone that this always hurts the middle class. So even if they truly did go after the wealthy, which they're not going to do because the wealthy can afford attorneys that would just drag this out for years. But let's just say they did actually go after the wealthy. The wealthy just passes this on to their employees and the consumer, which is us. So anyone thinks that like government, big government, and going after the wealthy with all these taxes is a good thing has lost their mind, because that never ends up happening. It's always the middle class that gets the bill. And we know that the Fed now, digital currency is coming. So the government's going to have complete control over your money with that. So let's use common sense for a minute. Wouldn't it make sense that they would need to hire all of these agents to audit like the middle class and small business owners so that they can just simply automatically deduct the money that you owe or that they say you owe from the Fed Now account? Like, Tara, don't you think that makes more sense than them going after like wealthy people and larger businesses that would just take them to court?
Oh, it's like, Stephanie, it's all part of their plan to destroy the middle class and turn the United States into like this totalitarian government regime. And honestly, what better way to do that than to control every move that we make by making Americans dependent on digital currency that can be controlled entirely by the government? I mean, almost every policy that this administration makes is designed to divide the country under the guise of equity and take away our independence, right? Like, let's look at something seemingly as benign as buying a house. So this past week, the Biden administration came up with yet another policy aimed at destroying the middle class. And you're not seeing much about it on mainstream media, but starting May 1st, the Biden administration is going to require adjusting mortgage calculations to basically penalize home buyers that have a FICO score of 680 or above. And according to an article in the New York Post, that's about 2/3 of the population. And the purpose of this whole thing is to reduce home buying costs for people with low credit scores. So basically, what the Biden administration is doing is punishing people with good credit scores in order to subsidize people with shitty credit scores who are irresponsible with their finances and are more likely to default on their mortgage loans. And I read an article in the New York Post about this whole thing. In fact, I read several articles on this, but I love the way that the author of this particular article, James Bovard, put it, because he described this policy as a quote, social justice surtax. And that's truly what this is. And like, honestly, this really pissed me off because I have worked very hard my entire life to be fiscally responsible and maintain a good credit score in the 800s. And that's not easy to do. I pay all of my bills on time. I don't buy shit I can't afford. And when I do use credit, I pay off my debts because that's what responsible Americans do. So now if I want to go buy a house, instead of getting a better mortgage rate loan because I can prove I'm financially responsible, instead I'm going to be told that I have to pay more because I have good credit. Like, what the fuck? And of course, the Federal Housing Authority is arguing like this isn't the case and it was just time to update their policies, so this isn't a big deal. But if you research how this whole thing works, it becomes pretty damn clear that this is a total punishment for fiscally responsible Americans, and it's really a way to create more of a racial divide and more of an economic tension between the poor and the middle class. So a few days ago on April 19th, the Federal Housing Finance Agency proposed a series of rules targeted at what they call fair lending, fair housing, and equitable housing finance plans. So they added requirements for lenders to with the purpose of increasing minority homeownership. And some of these objectives include, quote, reducing the home ownership gap for an underserved community and reducing disparities in negative outcomes for an underserved community in servicing loan modifications and loss mitigation. And according to the former FHA director, Mark Calabria, I think, he said, quote, shaping the policy to benefit anyone with lousy credit lets the Biden administration avoid offering sweetheart deals to minorities because that's a violation of federal law. So as a way to get around these legalities, Calabria said that the Biden administration is essentially trying to discriminate by race, but using legal rules that are in place. And this, because minorities tend to have lower credit scores, so that way they can go ahead and do this. And he added that this is all a part of their general belief that credit scores are due to societal factors that are out of people's control and have nothing to do with the reality of people actually working hard to build their credit. So this past Wednesday, there were 18 Senate Republicans who wrote a letter to the current Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Sandra Thompson, and they warned that this would not only put home buyers, but the entire housing market in danger. And their letter stated, quote, this short-sighted and counterproductive policy demonstrates a profound misunderstanding of the necessity of accurately tailoring housing finance products to credit risk and establish a perverse incentive that punishes hardworking Americans for their fiscal prudence. The housing market should not be exploited as a means to pander to targeted demographics that you have chosen, nor an instrument to secure political favoritism. And Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas told Fox News, quote, just when you thought Joe Biden couldn't be more out of touch with the hardships Americans are facing due to his failed economic agenda, skyrocketing interest rates, and record high Bidenflation, and I like how he did that, Bidenflation. He says Biden doubled down, now penalizing responsible Americans with good credit scores. This is totally illogical. The Biden administration must answer for why they're punishing Americans who have diligently met their financial obligations and earned higher credit scores. And then Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina also added, quote, this is yet another example of President Biden working to kill the American dream for hardworking families. And Stephanie, that's exactly what this is. This is yet another move by the Biden administration to destroy the ability for Americans to be independent. This administration's goal is basically to create a socialist, Marxist, communist, totalitarian, whatever regime where we all live in 15-minute cities without cars on a social credit system with the government controlling our money so that if we don't obey and do as we're told, we don't get to do anything.
Right. It's absolutely ridiculous. And people should strive to have good credit, and they just take away any incentive to do that. And just like you, like I've worked very hard to always pay off all my debt so that I'd have a good credit score. And it's like, for what? So they can do this. And you know what? It's not helping those people with poor credit. How is giving them a home loan helping them? They're going to end up foreclosing. They're going to end up in over their head, not able to, manage their payments if they have a history of not being able to manage their payments. So how is that really helping them? Like, it's really hurting everyone, every way you look at it. And it just shows how completely insane this administration is. And it's like, just like you said, Tara, I think there is a motive to wreck the country because Biden is compromised. It's like, how many ways do we have to look at these stories to put all the pieces together? Like, every move he makes is destroying America and hurting Americans. And yet there's still like people out there that want to vote for this guy. Are you kidding me? Insanity.
Yeah, like when I listened to his speech, and like I couldn't play it on this podcast because I can't listen to him talk for that long. Like, it really makes me ill. And so I just played that other clip where you only hear him briefly. But I mean, he's talking about freedom. And I'm like, you're the one that's trying to get rid of American freedom. Like, I don't understand anybody who doesn't see through the propaganda and the lies and realize like your life is shitty because of this fucking president.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The two good things about him running again is we're going to have a lot of like funny shit to share with everybody, because Kamala is going to be cackling and saying all kinds of ridiculous stuff that we can laugh at. And then Trump is going to like roast him like there's no tomorrow. So I mean, there will be some entertainment value to it, but I just can't imagine that anyone with any sense whatsoever is going to vote for this guy. But we'll see. I mean, crazier things have happened, right?
Yeah, and before we go, in case you didn't hear KJP's announcement yesterday, happy Lesbian Visibility Week.
Oh, okay. That's a
What
new
is
one.
Lesbian Visibility Week. Yes.
Okay. What does that even mean?
I have no idea.
Elaborate? No? Okay. Does that include transgender women?
Great question.
Okay. Well, visibility. Got it. All right. Well, that was our Freedom Friday. And I feel like we didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg with Biden. So we'll be back soon with the rest of the things that we just don't have time to cover right now because there's a lot and we're going to dive into all of it. So I hope everyone has a great weekend and we'll see you back here for our Motivation Manifestation Monday. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you get our latest episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you could, please rate and review the show. We are going to be reading every single review, and I would love it if you hopped over to Instagram at Unapologetically Outspoken and say hi. We want to see who's out there and start a conversation, plus get all of the topics that you want us to talk about next. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.